Have you ever seen a king lose his crown in the blink of an eye? Not on a battlefield, but in the hushed, carpeted sanctuary of an airport's VIP lounge. This is the story of Julian Vance, a CEO who thought he had the world at his feet and his beautiful, ambitious assistant on his arm. He believed his quiet wife, Eleanor, was at home, managing their perfect life. But in the time it takes for a champagne flute to shatter on the floor, he would learn that the most dangerous opponent is the one you never even saw playing the game. What happens when the woman you dismissed becomes the one who owns you? Stay with me. Julian Vance lived a life curated for the pages of Forbes and Fortune. As the CEO of Ethelred Innovations, a company at the bleeding edge of augmented reality, his public persona was one of relentless vision and effortless charisma. His suits were Tom Ford, his watch was a Patek Philippe, and his smile could secure a 9-figure deal. His life, from the outside, was a testament to meticulous design, and the most elegant piece in his collection was his wife, Eleanor. Eleanor Vance was the epitome of quiet grace. While Julian commanded boardrooms, Eleanor commanded their sprawling Greenwich estate with a serene efficiency that baffled him. She was beautiful in a timeless way, not with the sharp, trendy edge of the women who orbited Julian's world, but with a deep, observant stillness. She ran charity galas that were the talk of the season, her gardens were a masterpiece of landscape design, and she could discuss 18th century philosophy or quantum mechanics with equal, unassuming intelligence. Julian loved her for this, or so he told himself. She was the perfect partner, a stable, beautiful anchor for his high-flying life. He just wished she were a little more engaged in his world. When he'd come home, buzzing from a successful launch or a hostile takeover, and try to explain the intricacies of his latest software patent, her eyes would glaze over. She'd listen patiently, nod, and then ask if he remembered to call the arborist about the old oak tree. It was, he felt, a fundamental disconnect. He was building the future. She was tending a garden. This disconnect had, over the past 18 months, created a space that was filled with startling speed and efficiency by Sophia Sterling. Sophia was Julian's head of global marketing. She was everything Eleanor was not: sharp, ambitious, and utterly fluent in the language of corporate warfare. She had hair the color of liquid gold, a wardrobe of razor-sharp power suits, and a laugh that was just a little too loud in a quiet restaurant. Sophia didn't just understand Julian's world, she thrived in it. She mirrored his ambition, anticipated his needs, and looked at him with an undisguised adoration that he had long ago stopped seeing in his wife's eyes. Their affair began as most do: late nights at the office, celebratory dinners that stretched past midnight, a shared hotel suite during a conference in Singapore. It was easy. It felt, to Julian, almost logical. He and Sophia were partners in a way he and Eleanor could never be. They were building an empire together. The affair was just a perk of their synergy. The trip to Geneva was the culmination of everything. Ethelred was on the verge of its biggest leap yet. Project Chimera, a revolutionary AR platform that would integrate seamlessly into the automotive industry. It was audacious, expensive, and it needed one final, massive injection of capital. The deal was with a notoriously private and shrewd European investment firm, Vantage Point Capital. They were known for their aggressive due diligence and their enigmatic lead investor, who operated solely under the initials EV. The morning of the flight, the tension in the Vance home was a low hum beneath the surface of domesticity. Julian was packing, his movements crisp and impatient. "Eleanor, have you seen my silver cufflinks? The ones with the onyx inlay?" he called out from their cavernous walk-in closet. Eleanor appeared in the doorway, holding a small velvet box. "Right here, Julian. I had them cleaned." She passed them to him, her fingers brushing his. Her touch was cool. "Thanks," he muttered, not looking at her. "This Geneva trip is everything. If we land Vantage Point, we're not just a tech company anymore. We're a global standard." "I'm sure it will go well," she said, her voice even. She watched him pack. He was packing for a 3-day trip, but his suitcase held a week's worth of clothes. He always did. He called it contingency planning. She knew he would spend the weekend after the deal with Sophia in a chalet in the Alps. She had seen the booking confirmation on his tablet weeks ago, left open by mistake. It was a mistake he was making more and more often. "Sophia has been a miracle worker, you know," Julian continued, oblivious. "She's the one who got us to the meeting with EVR's people. The man, or woman, nobody seems to know, is a ghost. But Sophia charmed her way through 3 layers of gatekeepers. She's indispensable." "I'm sure she is," Eleanor said. A ghost. The irony was not lost on her. For the past decade, she had felt like a ghost in her own life, a silent spectator to her husband's grand performance. As he closed his suitcase with a decisive snap, he finally turned to her. He softened his expression, the way he did before asking for a favor. "Ellie, listen. I'll be back Sunday night. I know we were supposed to go to that benefit for the museum." "It's fine, Julian," she interrupted softly. "This is important. Don't worry about it." He smiled, relieved at her easy acquiescence. He leaned in and kissed her cheek. The kiss was a dry, familiar formality. "You're the best, Ellie. Truly. I don't know what I'd do without you." He picked up his briefcase. "Wish me luck." "You don't need luck, Julian," she said, looking him directly in the eye. "You just need to be prepared for all possible outcomes." He laughed, misinterpreting her words as a vote of confidence. "That's my girl. Always practical." He walked out of the room, his footsteps echoing down the marble hallway. Eleanor stood motionless for a long moment, the scent of his expensive cologne lingering in the air. Then she walked over to her own closet. She pulled out a sleek, dark grey travel tote and a perfectly tailored Armani suit. Her movements were calm, deliberate, and utterly silent. Her flight was in 3 hours. A different airline, a different terminal, but the same destination. The Ascendia Global First Class Lounge at JFK was a haven of hushed tones and understated luxury. The air smelled of expensive leather, brewed coffee, and the faint, clean scent of ozone from the air purifiers. Julian Vance and Sophia Sterling had secured a semi-private alcove with plush armchairs overlooking the tarmac. A bottle of Bollinger was sweating in a silver bucket between them. Julian had his tie loosened, a rare sign of relaxation. He was energized, electric with the proximity of the deal and the woman beside him. Sophia was radiant. She leaned towards him, her voice a low murmur that was for his ears only. "The final projections look even better than we thought," she said, tapping a pristine fingernail on her tablet. "The pre-orders we've secured on the back of the rumors alone have been astronomical. Vantage Point would be insane to walk away." "It's not about the numbers, Sophia. It's about control," Julian mused, swirling the champagne in his glass. "EV is a shark. I've heard stories. They gutted a German robotics firm last year because the COO showed a moment of weakness. We need to be flawless." "We are flawless," she purred, placing her hand on his thigh, just high enough to be intimate, but low enough to be plausibly deniable. Her touch sent a familiar jolt through him. "You and me, Julian. We're the dream team." He smiled and covered her hand with his. "Damn right we are." He looked at her, truly looked at her. In the soft lounge lighting, she was ambition made flesh. She understood him. The guilt he sometimes felt about Eleanor seemed distant, a fuzzy, irrelevant emotion from another life. This was his real life, his real partner. They spent the next hour in their bubble of shared confidence, their conversation a seamless blend of business strategy and whispered affections. Sophia laughed at his jokes, her head tilted back, her blonde hair catching the light. Julian refilled her glass, his arm brushing hers, their world shrinking to the space between their two chairs. They were so absorbed in each other that they didn't notice the woman who had entered the lounge. Eleanor Vance moved with a purpose that was entirely at odds with her usual placid demeanor. She had checked her coat, her gait was steady, and her eyes, clear and focused, scanned the lounge. She spotted them almost immediately. A pang, sharp and cold, went through her chest. But it was an old wound, one whose pain had long since dulled into a catalyst for action. She saw Sophia's hand on her husband's leg. She saw the way he looked at her, the easy intimacy that screamed of countless hours just like this one. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel the sting. This was her husband, the man she had built a life with, supported, and loved. But the image in front of her was a betrayal so casual, so public, it was like a slap in the face. She took a slow, steadying breath, drew her shoulders back, and started walking towards them. Her heels made no sound on the thick, plush carpet. It was Sophia who saw her first. Her smile faltered, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. "Julian," she said, her voice suddenly tight. "Isn't that—" Julian turned, following her gaze. His face went through a rapid series of emotions. Confusion, then disbelief, then a flash of pure, unadulterated panic that he quickly masked with irritation. "Eleanor, what the hell are you doing here?" He stood up, blocking Sophia from her view, a clumsy, instinctual gesture of protection. "Is everything okay? Did something happen at home?" Eleanor stopped a few feet from their table. She looked past Julian's shoulder at Sophia, who was now staring, wide-eyed and flustered. Eleanor's expression was perfectly, unnervingly neutral. "Everything at home is fine, Julian," she said, her voice calm and clear, cutting through the hushed ambiance of the lounge. "Then what is this? Are you following me?" The accusation was sharp, his attempt to seize control of a situation rapidly spiraling away from him. "Don't be ridiculous," Eleanor replied, her tone cool. She then addressed Sophia directly, a move that made both of them flinch. "You must be Sophia Sterling. Julian has mentioned your indispensable work for the company." Sophia, recovering her composure, put on a brittle professional smile. She rose from her chair, extending a hand she knew wouldn't be taken. "That's me. It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Mrs. Vance. Julian talks about you all the time." The lie was as smooth as silk. The air crackled with unspoken tension. Other patrons in the lounge began to subtly turn their heads, sensing the unfolding drama. A dropped pin would have sounded like a thunderclap. Julian stepped in, his voice low and furious. "Eleanor, this is highly inappropriate. Whatever this is about, it can wait until I get home. You need to leave." Eleanor didn't even look at him. Her gaze was locked on Sophia, who was now beginning to look smug. Sophia clearly saw this as the desperate act of a neglected wife, a pathetic scene that only confirmed her own superior position. She gave Julian's arm a little squeeze, a gesture of ownership. She smiled at Eleanor, a condescending, pitying little smile that said, "The game is over, dear. You've lost." That smile was the final catalyst. It was the spark that lit the fuse Eleanor had been carefully laying for 6 long months. The silence in their small corner of the world was absolute. It felt as if the entire Ascendia lounge, with its soft music and clinking glasses, had faded into a distant hum. All that existed was the triangle of three people charged with betrayal, arrogance, and a gathering storm of retribution. Sophia's smile was the focal point of it all. It was a masterpiece of passive aggression, a silent declaration of victory. She saw Eleanor as a relic, a society wife out of her depth, making a clumsy, emotional scene. In Sophia's mind, the confrontation was already won. She held the power, the career, and the man. Julian, caught between his fury and his panic, decided to take charge. "Eleanor, I am not going to repeat myself. This is a private business meeting. You are making a scene. Go home." His voice was a low growl, meant to intimidate, to remind her of their established dynamic. He commanded, she complied. But Eleanor didn't flinch. She finally broke her gaze from Sophia and looked at her husband. The look in her eyes was not one of a scorned wife. It was not angry, or tearful, or hysterical. It was the calm, appraising look of a predator that knows the trap has been sprung. "A private business meeting," Eleanor repeated, her voice resonating with an unfamiliar authority. "Yes, I suppose it is. In which case, you should probably introduce me properly to your colleague." Julian was baffled. "What are you talking about?" "She knows who you are." "I don't think she does," Eleanor said softly. She took a step closer, entering their personal space. She was now standing directly in front of the table, the half-empty bottle of Bollinger separating her from the couple who had, moments ago, been celebrating their future. Sophia let out a small, condescending laugh. "I think I have a pretty clear idea of who you are, Mrs. Vance." "Do you?" Eleanor's eyes narrowed slightly. "Then please, enlighten me." The challenge hung in the air. Julian, seeing Sophia's confidence, felt a surge of relief. Sophia would handle this. She was brilliant in a fight. Sophia leaned forward, her voice dripping with faux politeness. "You're Julian Vance's wife. You live in Greenwich. You run the Children's Hospital Gala. And I believe your prize-winning roses were featured in a magazine last spring. It was a lovely spread." The dismissal was total. She had reduced Eleanor's entire existence to a handful of domestic achievements. Julian almost smiled. It was a perfect, surgical takedown. Eleanor listened patiently until Sophia had finished. She didn't react, she didn't defend herself. She simply waited. And then she delivered the line that would shatter their world. "That's all true," Eleanor said, her voice still quiet, but now imbued with a core of steel. "I do all of those things. But I believe the introduction you're looking for, in the context of this particular business meeting, is a little different." She paused, letting the moment stretch, drawing the tension to a breaking point. She looked from Julian's confused face to Sophia's smug one. "My name is Eleanor Vance," she said, her enunciation precise and devastating. "And you, Julian, have been preparing for the better part of a year to pitch Project Chimera to my company." Julian stared blankly. "Your company? What are you talking about? Your charity foundation?" Eleanor gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head. "No, not the foundation." She reached into her tote bag and pulled out a slim, elegant business card case. With a flick of her thumb, she slid a card out and placed it on the table next to the champagne bucket. It landed with a soft, final thud. The card was thick, cream-colored stock, the lettering a minimalist, embossed silver. It read, "E. Vance Managing Partner, Vantage Point, Capital Silence." It was not a quiet moment. It was a void, a complete and total absence of sound, of comprehension, of reality itself. Sophia's condescending smile didn't just fade, it collapsed. Her face went slack with shock, her skin suddenly pale against her perfect makeup. Her eyes darted from the card to Eleanor's face and back again, her brain refusing to process the information. "Evie," she whispered, the initials catching in her throat like a shard of glass. Julian's reaction was slower, more catastrophic. He stared at the card, his world tilting on its axis. Vantage Point Capital. E. Vance. Evie. The ghost. The shark. The mysterious, untouchable investor he had been obsessing over for months. His wife. Ellie. He looked at her. Truly looked at her. For what felt like the first time in a decade. He saw not the placid homemaker, but a woman of formidable, terrifying composure. The boring charity work, the quiet hours spent on her laptop she'd claimed were for auction planning, the trips to visit her college roommate in Zurich. It all coalesced into a new, horrifying picture. The champagne glass in Sophia's hand slipped from her nerveless fingers. It didn't shatter. It hit the plush carpet with a dull, muffled thud, spilling pale gold liquid onto the floor like a final, pathetic offering. The sound broke the spell. "I believe," Eleanor said, her voice now coolly professional as she addressed them both, "that we have a great deal to discuss on the flight to Geneva." The 8-hour flight to Geneva was a masterclass in psychological torture. They were all seated in the first-class cabin of the Swiss Air flight, a cruel irony of fate and airline booking systems. Eleanor was in seat 2A, a window seat. Julian and Sophia, whose tickets had been booked together, were across the aisle in 2D and 2F. The 2-foot-wide aisle felt like the Grand Canyon, an impassable, cavernous divide. The flight attendants, trained to cater to the whims of the ultra-wealthy, sensed the glacial tension immediately. Their professional smiles became a little more fixed, their offers of pre-departure champagne a little more hesitant. Eleanor accepted a glass of sparkling water with a slice of lemon. Julian waved the attendant away with a brusque gesture. Sophia just stared straight ahead, her face a frozen mask of disbelief. As the plane taxied and took off, the cabin was filled with the powerful roar of the engines. For anyone else, it was the sound of a journey beginning. For Julian and Sophia, it was the sound of their world ending. Julian's mind was a maelstrom. Evie Eleanor. The two concepts were so violently incompatible that his brain struggled to merge them. He kept replaying the scene in the lounge, searching for a flaw, a mistake, a sign that this was some elaborate, insane joke. But there was none. The cool authority in her eyes, the simple, undeniable fact of the business card. It was real. How? How could she have built a firm like Vantage Point Capital without him knowing? He thought back over the years. Her inheritance from her grandfather, the one she'd told him was modestly invested in some low-risk bonds. Her frequent trips, which he had dismissed as social obligations. Her hours spent in her home office, the door always closed. He had seen it all as the harmless hobbies of a bored wife. He had not seen it as the construction of an empire. His arrogance was a physical weight in his chest, crushing the air from his lungs. He had pitied her. He had felt superior, the dynamic provider for his quiet, unambitious wife. The entire foundation of his marriage, of his own self-perception, was a lie. And worse, a lie of his own making. He had been so blinded by his ego that he hadn't seen the person sleeping next to him for 15 years. He glanced across the aisle. Eleanor had put on a pair of noise-cancelling headphones and was reading a dense report on a tablet, its screen filled with charts and figures he couldn't comprehend from this distance. She was completely serene, as if she were on her way to a spa retreat. The casual display of her competence was more infuriating than any outburst would have been. Sophia, on the other hand, was visibly crumbling. The sleek, confident marketing executive had vanished, replaced by a terrified woman teetering on the edge of an abyss. Her career was built on her relationship with Julian, on her perceived influence over him. She had hitched her wagon to his star. But she had just discovered that the star itself was a satellite, orbiting a sun she never knew existed. She kept stealing panicked glances at Eleanor, then at Julian, expecting him to do something, to fix this. But Julian was lost in his own personal hell. Sophia had bet everything on the wrong Vance. She had sneered at the Queen, not realizing she was just a courtier schmoozing with the consort. The condescending smile she had given Eleanor in the lounge now felt like a brand on her soul. She had smiled at her executioner. An hour into the flight, the meal service began. The flight attendant approached Eleanor first. "Mrs. Vance, would you care for the seared scallops or the beef fillet tonight?" "The scallops, please." "And a glass of the Sancerre," Eleanor replied without looking up from her report. The attendant then turned to Julian and Sophia. "And for you, sir? Ma'am?" "Nothing," Julian snapped. Sophia shook her head, unable to speak. The thought of food was nauseating. The cabin lights dimmed. Most passengers settled in to sleep or watch movies. But for the trio in row 2, there was no rest. Every subtle shift in Eleanor's seat, every time she turned a page on her tablet, was a thunderclap in the oppressive silence. Halfway over the Atlantic, Julian could bear it no longer. He unbuckled his seatbelt, stood up, and took a step into the aisle. He needed to talk to her, to confront her, to understand. Eleanor seemed to sense his movement. She lowered her tablet and removed her headphones, her eyes meeting his. The look on her face was not inviting. It was patient, but firm. "Julian," she said, her voice low but carrying easily in the quiet cabin. "Sit down. You are attracting attention." "I don't care," he hissed, leaning down, his hands gripping the top of her seat. "We need to talk. Now." "No," she said simply. "We don't. Everything you need to say can wait until we are in a professional setting. This airplane is not it." "A professional setting? Ellie, this is our life. You've been lying to me for how long?" "My business is my business, Julian. Just as your business has always been yours," she replied, her voice remaining level, betraying no emotion. "You never showed an interest in my hobbies, so I didn't feel the need to bore you with the details." The word hobbies was a poisoned dart, a perfect echo of his own dismissive attitude. It hit him squarely, and he recoiled as if struck. "And her?" he whispered, nodding his head towards a rigid Sophia. "Was this all for her? A game to get back at me?" For the first time, a flicker of something, disappointment, perhaps, crossed Eleanor's face. "You still don't get it, do you? You think this is about her?" "Julian, she is a symptom, not the disease. This is about business, specifically the business of Ethelred Innovations and its future. Now sit down before you force the cabin crew to intervene." Her logic was irrefutable, her composure absolute. Defeated, he stared at her for a second longer, searching for the wife he thought he knew. He found no trace of her. He retreated to his seat, slumping down, the fight completely drained out of him. He looked over at Sophia. She was watching him, her eyes wide with a desperate, pleading look. He turned away. He couldn't look at her. At that moment, she was not his partner or his lover. She was a liability. She was the co-conspirator in a fool's paradise, and the gates had just slammed shut. The rest of the flight passed in stony, agonizing silence. As the plane began its final descent into Geneva, the morning sun breaking over the snow-capped Alps, Eleanor finally put her tablet away. She looked out the window, a small, thoughtful smile on her lips. It was the smile of a chess master, watching her opponent finally realize he's been in checkmate for the last 5 moves. The offices of Dubois and Associates were located on the top floor of a sleek glass and steel building overlooking Lake Geneva. The firm represented Vantage Point Capital in Switzerland, and their main boardroom was a study in minimalist power. A single, massive black marble table dominated the room, surrounded by 20 Mies van der Rohe chairs. One wall was a floor-to-ceiling window, offering a breathtaking view of the Jet d'Eau. The air was cool, sterile, and smelled of money. Eleanor was there first. She was not seated, but stood by the window, conversing in fluent, easy French with Mr. Dubois, a severe-looking man in his 60s with silver hair and a watch that probably cost more than Julian's car. When Julian and Sophia entered, the conversation stopped. Eleanor turned, her expression now entirely that of E. Vance, managing partner. "Julian, Miss Sterling, glad you could make it. Please have a seat." She gestured to the chairs on the opposite side of the long table. It was a deliberate seating arrangement, turning the table into a battlefield. Vantage Point on one side, Ethelred on the other. Julian and Sophia sat. The legal team from Ethelred, who had flown in a day earlier and were clearly bewildered by the sudden shift in dynamics, filed in and took the seats beside them. They exchanged nervous, questioning glances with Julian, who offered nothing in return. Mr. Dubois cleared his throat. "Good morning. We are here to discuss the Series C funding round for Ethelred Innovations Project Chimera. Representing Vantage Point Capital is managing partner E. Vance." He nodded towards Eleanor. "Representing Ethelred Innovations is CEO Julian Vance." The formality of it was surreal. Julian felt a hysterical laugh bubble up in his throat and quickly suppressed it. Eleanor took her seat at the head of her side of the table. She opened a slim leather portfolio. "Thank you for joining us. My team and I have reviewed the pitch deck and the financials you sent over last week. While the top-line numbers are impressive, we have some significant concerns regarding the go-to-market strategy and the projected user acquisition costs." Her voice was crisp, professional, and completely devoid of any personal history. She was Evie, the shark. Julian, trying to reclaim some semblance of control, leaned forward. "Eleanor, Ms. Vance, the strategy was designed by the best marketing mind in the industry." He gestured towards Sophia. "Ms. Sterling can walk you through the specifics. Our projections are aggressive, but achievable." Eleanor's gaze shifted to Sophia for the first time since they had entered the room. It was not a look of anger, but of cold, clinical assessment. "Ms. Sterling, your strategy hinges on securing exclusive partnerships with 3 major luxury automotive brands, a German, an Italian, and a British manufacturer. Correct?" Sophia, finding her voice, nodded. "Yes. We are in advanced talks with all 3. The brand synergy is undeniable. And your projected cost for these partnerships, including marketing co-ops and integration fees, is budgeted at $50 million, Eleanor continued, her eyes fixed on Sophia. "That is our initial estimate, yes," Sophia said, a hint of her old confidence returning. This was her domain. She knew these numbers inside and out. Eleanor slid a single sheet of paper across the marble table. "Then perhaps you can explain this." Sophia picked it up. Her hands were trembling slightly. It was an internal memorandum from the German car manufacturer, dated 2 days prior. It was a summary of their final meeting with Ethelred. At the bottom, a paragraph was highlighted. It outlined their final offer for the partnership, an offer that included a demand for a 5% equity stake in Project Chimera itself, on top of a $75 million integration fee. Sophia's blood ran cold. She had deliberately buried that memo. She was planning to inform Julian of the increased cost after the Vantage Point funding was secured, believing she could spin it as a last-minute negotiation tactic. It was a gamble, a dangerous one, but she had been confident she could pull it off. "This document appears to be preliminary," Sophia stammered, her mind racing for an excuse. "Their position is still fluid." "Is it?" Eleanor countered, her voice sharp. "Because I spoke with their CEO, Klaus Richter, on my flight over. He was quite firm. He also mentioned that you were offered a far more reasonable deal 3 months ago, which you rejected without consulting your board, believing you could squeeze them for more." His words, not mine. The room fell silent. Julian turned to look at Sophia, his eyes blazing with a new kind of fury. This wasn't about a personal betrayal anymore. This was professional incompetence, negligence. Eleanor wasn't finished. She turned the page in her portfolio. "Furthermore, the marketing budget. You have allocated $20 million for a global influencer campaign. Your chosen lead for this campaign is a social media personality whose primary audience is 14 to 18-year-old females. Can you explain how this demographic aligns with the target market for a 6-figure luxury sedan?" Sophia opened her mouth, but no words came out. She had chosen that influencer because she was represented by an agency run by a close friend, a deal that would have netted Sophia a significant and entirely secret kickback. It was a detail she was certain no one could ever uncover. "The numbers in this pitch are not just aggressive, Miss Sterling," Eleanor stated, her voice like ice. "They are a fantasy. Some are built on flawed assumptions, and others," she paused, letting the weight of her words settle, "are built on what appears to be a deliberate misrepresentation of key negotiations." She closed her portfolio with a quiet, final click. The sound echoed in the silent room. She then looked directly at her husband. The mask of EV slipped for just a second, and he saw a flash of the woman he married, a woman he had profoundly disappointed. "The technology behind Project Chimera is brilliant, Julian, truly. The engineering is visionary," she said, her voice softening almost imperceptibly. "But the leadership that is meant to steer it to market is either incompetent or corrupt, and Vantage Point Capital does not invest in flawed leadership." Julian sat there, stripped bare in front of his lawyers and his lover. He had walked into the room to pitch his masterpiece. Instead, his wife had systematically, and with surgical precision, dissected his company, exposed his mistress as a fraud, and laid his own ignorance bare for all to see. He wasn't in a business meeting. He was executed, and his wife was holding the axe. Their hotel was the Four Seasons de Berg, a palace of old-world elegance. Their reservation was for the presidential suite, a sprawling apartment with panoramic views of the lake and the old town. Julian had booked it months ago, envisioning a triumphant celebration with Sophia after sealing the deal of a lifetime. Now, the opulent rooms, with their silk-panelled walls, crystal chandeliers and bowls of fresh orchids, felt like a gilded tomb. Sophia had been dismissed after the meeting with a curt, "We'll be in touch," from one of Eleanor's associates. She had practically fled, her face ashen. Julian was left to walk back with Eleanor, a silent, excruciating 10-minute journey where the only sound was the clicking of her heels on the pavement. The moment the suite door closed behind them, the dam of Julian's composure broke. "Why?" he choked out, his voice raw with a potent cocktail of rage, humiliation, and despair. "Why would you do this, Eleanor? Why humiliate me like that? In front of my team? In front of her? Eleanor didn't answer immediately. She walked over to the minibar, took out a bottle of still water, and poured herself a glass. Her movements were calm, measured. It infuriated him. This wasn't about humiliation, Julian. This was about due diligence, she said, finally turning to face him. That was a boardroom, not a stage for our personal drama. The facts I presented were just that. Facts. Facts you dug up to destroy me, he shot back, pacing the length of the vast living room. You could have told me. You could have come to me privately. You could have warned me about Sophia's incompetence. But you chose to let me walk into that ambush. You wanted to see me fall. Warn you? She let out a short, mirthless laugh. When exactly should I have done that, Julian? Should I have brought it up over breakfast while you were texting her under the table? Or perhaps I should have mentioned that your head of marketing was jeopardizing the company's future after you told me you were going on a team-building retreat that just happened to be at a couple's resort in Napa. Julian stopped pacing. He stared at her. You knew. How long have you known? I've suspected for over a year, she said, her voice losing its business-like edge and taking on a weary, sorrowful tone. I've known with certainty for 6 months. The first confirmation was the hotel booking for the chalet in the Alps. You left your tablet on the kitchen counter. It was careless. 6 months. For 6 agonizing months, she had known. She had watched him lie to her face every single day. She had smiled at him, passed him the salt, asked about his day, all while carrying the crushing weight of his betrayal. The strength, the sheer force of will it must have taken, was staggering. He collapsed onto a velvet sofa, his head in his hands. Ellie, I'm sorry, he mumbled. It was a mistake. She meant nothing. It was just an ego trip, a stupid cliché. It had nothing to do with you. With us. He looked up, hoping to see a crack in her resolve, a glimmer of the forgiving wife he had always taken for granted. He saw nothing but a profound, unshakable disappointment. It had everything to do with us, she said softly, walking towards him. She didn't sit next to him, but perched on the edge of an armchair opposite. It showed me that you don't see me. You haven't truly seen me in years. You saw a comfortable, predictable part of your life's architecture, a decorative element. And because you didn't see me, you assumed I couldn't see you. She leaned forward. So I started looking, really looking. Not just at you, but at your business. I founded Vantage Point with my grandfather's seed money 8 years ago, Julian. He didn't leave me a modest inheritance. He left me a challenge. He told me I had a better mind for investment than anyone he'd ever met, and that it would be a sin to let it atrophy in a garden. 8 years. An entire secret life lived in parallel to their own. I started small, she continued. Tech startups, biotech, sustainable energy. Things you found boring. I built it, piece by piece, quietly. I never hid it, not really. The tax returns were filed jointly. The account statements came to the house. You just never bothered to look. You were too busy building your own empire to notice I had one of my own. The truth of her words was a physical blow. He had signed those tax returns without a second glance, handing them off to his accountant. He had tossed aside her mail, assuming it was charity solicitations. It wasn't a lie of omission on her part. It was a failure of attention on his. When I found out about Sophia, Eleanor went on, my first instinct was to do what any wife would, to confront you, to scream, to cry. But then I thought, what would E. Vance do? E. Vance wouldn't make an emotional scene. She would gather data. She would assess the damage. So I launched a quiet investigation, not into the affair, but into Ethelred, into its vulnerabilities. And the biggest vulnerability I found was Sophia Sterling. You were so blinded by your affair that you gave her unchecked authority. She was making bad deals, fudging numbers, lining her own pockets. She wasn't just your mistress, Julian. She has cancer in your company. She was going to be the reason Project Chimera failed, with or without my money. He finally understood. This wasn't revenge. It was a rescue mission. A brutal, painful, devastatingly public rescue mission for the company he had built, executed by the woman he had betrayed. She wasn't trying to destroy his creation. She was trying to save it from him. "So what now?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "The deal is dead. Vantage Point is out. You've made your point." Eleanor stood up and walked to the vast window, looking out at the city lights twinkling on the surface of the lake. "Who said the deal is dead?" she asked, her back to him. "The deal is not dead, but the terms have changed." The final meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. the next morning, back in the sterile boardroom at Dubois and Associates. This time it was a much smaller group, just Julian, Eleanor, and their respective lead counsels. Sophia Sterling was nowhere to be seen. A single email sent from Eleanor's lawyer to Ethelred's board the previous evening, detailing Sophia's professional misconduct with irrefutable evidence, had ensured her immediate suspension, pending termination. Her corporate life was over. Julian had not slept. He had spent the night replaying his entire marriage in his mind, viewing it through the new, terrifying lens of his wife's true identity. Every forgotten conversation, every dismissed opinion, every patronizing smile he had ever given her came back to haunt him. He had been married to a titan of industry and treated her like a household manager. He walked into the boardroom a changed man. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out exhaustion. He was no longer the charismatic visionary CEO. He was a defendant at his own sentencing. Eleanor was already there, looking as composed as ever. She wore a charcoal grey dress that was both elegant and severe. She nodded at him as he sat, a gesture of professional courtesy that felt more distancing than any insult. "Good morning, Julian," she began, dispensing with formalities. "I trust you've had time to think." "I've done nothing but think," he said, his voice hoarse. "Good," she replied. "Then let's be clear about the situation. Project Chimera is, as I said, a brilliant piece of engineering. It deserves to succeed. However, Ethelred Innovations in its current state lacks the disciplined leadership to guarantee that success. The market has no confidence in you right now. Your board has no confidence in you. And after yesterday, I can't imagine you have much confidence in yourself." Every word was true, and every word was a perfectly aimed blow. Vantage Point Capital is therefore prepared to move forward with the full $150 million investment, she continued. But we are not investing in your leadership. We are acquiring a controlling interest. This is no longer a funding round, it is a takeover. Julian's lawyer shifted uneasily in his seat, but Julian just stared at his wife. Of course, this was the final move in her game of chess. It was always going to be a checkmate. "My team will be restructuring the board," Eleanor said, sliding a new proposal across the table. "I will be taking the position of chairwoman. We will be installing a new CEO, a man named Marcus Thorne, who has an impeccable track record of scaling tech companies. You may know of his work at Cygnus Dynamics." Julian knew him. Thorne was a legend, a brilliant, ruthless operator who didn't tolerate egos. The entire executive marketing department will be dissolved and rebuilt. all of Sophia Sterling's contracts and partnerships will be subject to a forensic audit. She finally paused, letting him absorb the full scope of his defeat. He was being dethroned, his kingdom dismantled and rebuilt in her image. "What about me?" he asked, the question small and pathetic in the cavernous room. "That," Eleanor said, "is your only choice in this matter. You have two options. Option 1. You resign as CEO, effective immediately. Vantage Point will purchase your remaining shares at a generous premium over their current market value. You walk away from a very wealthy man. You can sign a non-compete, move to an island, and never work another day in your life." It was an exile, a golden cage, but a cage nonetheless. "Option 2, she continued, her gaze unwavering. "You accept a new role, Chief Technology Officer. You will be demoted from the board. You will report to Marcus Thorne, and by extension, to me. You will have no executive authority, no control over budget or strategy. Your sole responsibility will be to oversee the technical development of Project Chimera. You will be a brilliant, well-paid employee in the company you founded." It was a humiliation. To stay and work for the woman he had betrayed, to be a subordinate in his own house. But it was also a chance to stay with his creation, the only thing, apart from his wife, that he had ever truly built. He looked at her, at this incredible, formidable woman he had so profoundly underestimated. He saw the cold logic of the investor, but beneath it, he saw something else, a flicker of something that might have been mercy. She wasn't just exiling him. She was giving him a path, however painful, to stay with his work. The choice was simple. It was a choice between his pride and his purpose. For the first time in his life, he realized they were not the same thing. His pride had led him to Sophia, to arrogance, to this very boardroom. His purpose was technology, the dream of Project Chimera. He took a deep breath. "I'll stay," he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "I'll take the CTO position." Eleanor's expression didn't change, but a subtle tension in her shoulders seemed to release. She gave a single sharp nod. "Very well. Our lawyers will draw up the new employment contract." She stood up. The meeting concluded. Her work was done. As she gathered her papers, Julian spoke one last time, his voice quiet. "Our marriage, Eleanor? Is that also part of the takeover?" She paused at the door, her back to him. For a long moment, she said nothing. The fate of their personal lives hung, suspended in the sterile air. "Like any venture," she said, without turning around, "it is now subject to a period of intense and rigorous due diligence. I'll be in touch." And with that, she walked out, leaving Julian Vance alone at the table, the undisputed master of a kingdom he no longer ruled. In the end, Julian Vance's downfall wasn't a hostile takeover from a competitor. It was a quiet, methodical coup from within his own home. He learned the hardest lesson of his life, that real power isn't always the loudest voice in the room. It's often the silent observer, the underestimated partner, the quiet diligence you dismiss. Eleanor didn't just expose an affair. She dismantled a reality built on arrogance, revealing a fundamental flaw in her husband's vision. He could see the future of technology, but he was blind to the titan of industry sitting across the breakfast table from him. This story is a powerful reminder that the people we take for granted often hold the cards we never even knew were in play. Was Eleanor's long game a masterpiece of strategy, or a cold, calculated revenge? And what of Julian's choice to stay? Was it a genuine attempt at atonement, or simply a man clinging to the last remnants of his shattered empire? I want to hear your take on this complex web of betrayal and power. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of hidden strength resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it, and subscribe for more tales of drama, justice, and the surprising ways the tables can turn.